Okay, so I'd like to start today by thinking about the relationship between the rural and the urban. So I've heard that you're all geniuses here, so I've tried to make this very simple. I've devised a very simple test. The image on the left or the right is rural and urban. But really, it's about the concept of what is rural, what is urban. For some of you, maybe it means that Starbucks is over 15 minutes away. For me, then you know you're in the rural. But the fact is that it's the same image. And the rural and the urban have collided in the age of rapid urbanization. And that's what I want to discuss today. We have collisions between infrastructure and agriculture, infrastructure in the landscape, and a collision between traditional forms of living and modern housing. So the question is, how do we engage these collisions, these contradictions through design? Today, I'm going to talk you through 5 paradoxes that occur through the process of rapid urbanization. And these paradoxes occur because, well, at the global level, we all understand the forces of urbanization. But when they meet local conditions, when they meet specific cultural and societal conditions, then very diverse things happen. And the question will be how we engage that through design. So just a background information. Over the last 10 years, Joshua Bookover and myself at the University of Hong Kong, we've been operating a nonprofit research and design laboratory. We research into the processes of urbanization, and we think about how to engage that, and we test it out. We develop prototypes for changing, for altering that process, and for engaging this process. So it's a Robin Hood act, to be very honest. We leverage different forms of funding, academic funding. We leverage donations, government funding. We work with communities. And what's interesting about it is that when you're not sure who is paying you, then it creates a very collaborative model for working. The first paradox I want to talk about is very simple. When we build these massive infrastructures to not only connect new urban centers, but to encourage development in new rural areas, what about the massive disruptions and disconnections that it creates at the ground level? This occurred to us in one of our school projects, the Mulan School in Guangdong province, where the high-speed railway had to be built through the site of the school, a massive cut in the earth. So what we did was we took the funding from the retaining wall, from the development of the railway infrastructure, and we added to it. We added a public space, we added an ecological toilet and rebed. Today, the high-speed railway runs right behind a new infrastructure, an ecological and social infrastructure. So we think it's possible to combine different forms of infrastructure. Now, as migrants go to the cities in search of work, often what they end up doing is to help build the very cities. So the money they send back, however, is usually invested in a house. They don't trust banks. They invest it in the house. It could take 10, 20, 30 years to build. You know this. The paradox here is that as more and more people leave to go to the cities, the population declines. It gets more empty. But the building density actually rises. So the village is getting denser and denser even as people leave the village. In our very first project, we had to consider what to do with a new primary school. And we thought, how could the school engage the community? And what could the school, as a building, give back to the community? So this is the design. It's built into the rice terraces. And today, it's the sole public space for when this community of migrants comes back for important weddings or yearly events. It's the only public space in which they can all gather. Underneath the steps creates a covered walkway for the students, and the front of the building faces the terraced rice farming landscape beyond. So the school is really a bridge between the agricultural economy and the new migrant economy. As people leave, it also creates a new social transformation back in the village. Not only are the elderly and the children remaining, but we've heard cases where one brother will stay home and take care of his other 5 brothers' children. So it creates new family structures. On the other hand, there is also a dramatic transformation in the style of house building. A kind of generic system that is known all over the world for its simplicity and because you don't need any expertise really to build it. This has created the everywhere village. So as these deep social transformations are taking place on the inside, exteriorly, the rural and the urban have become more and more similar. They have become indistinct in the age of urbanization. It's really hard in some places to tell what is rural and what is urban. In a project in Hunan province, our Hong Kong partner, a charity, the Institute for Integrated Rural Development, asked us to develop a new healthcare building. This is their existing healthcare building. So if you got sick, well, you needed to at least know 2 or 3 very healthy relatives to help carry you up the 3 flights of stairs for treatment. This is the land that they bought. What we found was that we had to engage the issue of accessibility. That was urgent. But the cost for putting in an elevator was the same cost as putting in a ramp. And we developed a ramp, which also became a kind of community space. So we took financial value and we tried to add on social value. Now, old people from across the street in this old person's home now come here and use it for exercise. This was something that was unanticipated. Children come here to play. They run through the ramp. And not only is this healthcare building a place for the sick, the building has also become the focus of the community. It has also become a place in which health has been promoted. This process is only speeding up. A year ago in Guangdong province, a village looked like this village in Changlu. 6 months later, it looks like this. And today, it has a density that is greater than in most cities. So how does this happen? It's because it occurs at the level of the design. At the level of design, the entire village must get together and agree on the same layout and design for the housing. So everybody simply wants the biggest house on the biggest piece of land. So the paradox is that the village, which is formed traditionally from collective interest, is the place now where the common good has been given away to individual interest. In this case study is Sichuan province, and we had an opportunity to design a village from scratch, a new prototype for the modern village. The story of this village, it's called Jintai Village, is that after the great 2008 Sichuan earthquake, the villagers had already rebuilt their houses. And a year and a half later, before many of them even moved in, aftershocks and rainfall and landslides knocked down all the new houses. So this was already the 3rd time in which they had rebuilt their houses. We got in touch with our partner, Nan Feng, a developer in Hong Kong, and we discussed how we could, if we had to rebuild the village a 3rd time, could we not do it better? Do we not have the responsibility to try to create a new prototype for this? So the funding for the basic house is there, and the villagers give some funding comes from the government, some from the villagers themselves. And Nan Feng provided funding to essentially upgrade the village to become a more ecological village. So they've paid for a reed water system. There's a gray water recycling system in the houses. And in our design, it's really about preserving the idea of the common good. On the ground level, spaces are opened up for a new microeconomy to happen. Spaces for workshops. Villagers have developed businesses as tourism begins to actually pass through this village. So more and more people are passing by. And on the rooftops is a space given for individual household farming. Ironically, even though it's a community of farmers, they have very little land for their own individual farming. So we're also working with a local Chinese charity to help them develop crops, develop ways of farming, which is going to strengthen their economic viability. So far, we have been looking at what happens when the urban invades the rural. So I'd like to pause and look at what happens when the rural invades the urban. And for this, we're going to move about 1,000 kilometers north to Ulaanbaatar, where much of the population is still living as traditional nomadic herding society. And this, the Mongolian nomadic tent, or ger, has facilitated this. Now, in recent years, because of very cold winters and a government policy to allow every Mongolian to claim 700 square meters of land, they moved the ger to come to the city, and the rule is that you have to build a fence around it so that we can keep track of your land now that you have it. Now, you have to understand that land is collectively owned in the kind of nomadic concept. So this is very new. Over time, it has created this, the city of nomads, where over half of the urban population, over 600,000 people, live in the ger districts. This district may look like a suburbs, but it has no clear infrastructure. So life in the ger districts is not easy. You have to collect water from local kiosks, and garbage is an idea that is completely alien to a nomadic lifestyle. They simply don't know what to do with it. It's an invention of urbanization. Our first task, working with our partners, Asia Society, was to develop a garbage recycling and collection center. It took some time to discuss so that the garbage was not thrown directly on the ramp. So there's a lot of education involved. But in the future, this will be the foundation for a new community center. The garbage recycling center will evolve into a kiosk, into community showers, playgrounds. Because in Mongolian, according to our Mongolian partner Badran, there is no equivalent word for community. They have no such experience with living as large communities. So from the very, very root, we have to develop the very concept of community. In another project with Ger Hub, we started to look at life within the traditional Mongolian ger, which finds itself in very foreign circumstances, enclosed within a fence, and essentially settled. So our solution was the ger plugin, in which a toilet and shower, modern and heating, can be plugged into the traditional ger. The idea is to help and to continuously to evolve a 1,000-year-old structure that has been built for nomadic living, and to evolve it in order to preserve this very important cultural and societal artifact or way of life, to essentially evolve a traditional way of life to a modern way of life. So where is the rural in an urban world? I know that you came to hear about the Humane city, and I'm sorry if it was a bit of a trick, but I think the idea is that we have to think about the urbanization process. And we have to start at its root, where it begins. And we have to start thinking about shaping that urbanization process. If we want to make our cities better, then we have to think about the process, and we have to begin at the heart of the rural, so that we can capture some of the vitality, some of the innovation, some of the aspects of community, and the ecological sustainability of traditional rural societies. A new framework for the relationship between rural and urban. Thank you.